All right. I'm super pumped today. I have an amazing guest who is so well qualified, got a super interesting journey. She's kind of like me. She's a little bit of a nerd. She loves to learn. She's always learning, always working on something new. And I have with me today Megan Lyons from the Lions Share Wellness. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you so much. I am really excited to be here with you today.
Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. We had a good little chat about a week ago when I was on your show. That was so much fun. I just couldn't wait to have you formally on my show. So thank you for doing that. And I just love to start out so our listeners and viewers can get to know you a little bit. Just tell us a little bit how both the Harvard trained and MBA trained from the Kellogg School over there at Northwestern just completely does a about face, I would say, at least a 180 and decides, hey, I'm going to go into holistic nutrition. Like, how does that even happen? Just give us a little bit about that backstory. I'm so curious.
Absolutely. Well, I can chart the first half of my life or so as just following the path that was laid out for me. I've always been a high achiever. I've always been someone who's passionate about whatever I'm doing, and I want to do it the best. So in middle school and high school, that just meant getting the best grades, studying whatever the courses were that you were told to study, and doing as much as I possibly could in terms of extracurriculars and all of that. That led me to Harvard, which interestingly enough, my parents begged me not to go to Harvard, but I really wanted to go. Once I visited, it was just amazing. So I really lit up there. I had one of the best 4 years of my life. It was so full of opportunity, so full of learning. I studied economics, which is not at all related to what I'm doing today, but I learned so much that I loved there. And then again, the path that, quote, everyone did when you studied economics at Harvard was go into management consulting. So I just thought, okay, everyone else wants to do that. I probably want to do that too. And I did that. It was a wonderful opportunity, great experience, so much learning. I was there for about 7 years total. In there, I also did my MBA because, again, that's what everyone did. And I didn't have a crisis moment like, I hate this. This is awful, any of that. I just thought, wow, this is pretty good. I I like my life. I'm learning, but I don't know if this is really what I was meant to be doing. There was just something gnawing away at me that was like, there's a little more for you. And more didn't mean in that case more money or more fame or any of that. It just meant more connection to what I really was passionate about doing. So I had to do some soul searching. I truly didn't think of nutrition as a career because I wasn't aware. Thankfully, the world has exploded now in terms of all types of nutrition practitioners, but I just wasn't really aware. So I did some soul searching. I gave myself 6 months once I left McKinsey, the consulting firm that I was at. And I said, in 6 months, if I can make X client agreements or make X dollars, whatever, then I'll keep going. And if not, that was a cool experiment. And I just have not looked back a day since. It's been 10 years. I love every single thing about it. I feel so fortunate to be doing what I'm doing. I'm continuously learning. Like you said, I've amassed a lot of other degrees and certifications in there, and I'm just happy to be alive.
That's amazing. Did you have any, like as a kid, was there any specific sport that you loved or any specific role model or person that was like, wow, I really want to kind of be like them, and they were, maybe super active or super, healthy or whatever it was? I mean, I'm just curious. I'm still intrigued. Like, how did this all really simmer into fruition? Like, how did you really just grab a hold of it?
Yes. So the answer is no. Growing up, I did not have a health role model. I did get one, and it's kind of a funky one, but I'll tell you that in a second. But growing up, we ate the standard American diet. I ate Pop-Tarts with butter for breakfast.
Oh,
I know, the frosted ones
amazing.
too. I ate hamburger helper for dinner, all this. And like my mom, and she was doing absolutely the best she could. Now she knows a lot more about health. Thank goodness, she just didn't know back then. But she would feel like we were being super healthy if we opened a can of corn and added that to our hamburger helper. So that's the kind of nutrition that I grew up with. I danced all through from when I was a baby all through college. So I was active, but I didn't really think of that as a sport or health or anything like that. But then the weird role model, the funky one that I mentioned, when I got to college, I actually met my husband now on move-in day then. We started dating 2 weeks later, and he was on the track and cross country team. And I had truly never thought of health, exercise, fueling my body at all until I encountered him and his teammates. And now I know, looking back, his idea of fueling his body might have been a little different than mine is now, but still the way he thought about it and the way he prioritized it really inspired me. Unfortunately, then I was like, I told you I want to be the best at everything. So I wanted to be the best at controlling my health. And I got too far into the over control. Well, the magazine says I should do 90 minutes on the elliptical. I'm going to do 2 hours on the elliptical. And it became like a game of control for me, which was not true health. I dealt with adrenal issues, hormonal issues, things like that, because I was basically just under fueling and burning out my body. And finally, that led me into the exploration of what is real health. It's not what my husband and his track team are doing. It's not what I'm doing on the elliptical, eating my protein bar for lunch. There's got to be something else. And from there, I really dove into the actual research.
Oh, cool. So a whole journey of self-exploration. I love that. And I wasn't too far off from that as a kid. We definitely had Hamburger Helper. We had, cold cereal, whatever I think we wanted to have Wheaties because those were all those famous, like you said, not only like dancers and gymnasts and Olympians and whatnot, but we wanted to be like them. So we ate, Wheaties, or if we couldn't afford it, I think my mom always bought like the knockoff brand of, I think they were like even knockoff of cornflakes called like Toasties or something like that. But yeah, I didn't grow up with the best, it was pretty much a standard American diet for the most part. And, my mom was doing her best, just like yours, because they just didn't really know. And I think we are so fortunate now. There is so much available, and there is so many, both, I would say, role models that are amazing. There's also those that aren't so amazing. There's so much available. It's like the proverbial, drinking through the fire hose approach. And that's what I love about you, is you kind of keep it pretty simple. I've listened to a bunch of your podcasts, and I love how you kind of keep it real simple. You try to stick to, just the biggest needle movers, as I might like to call them, because it doesn't have to be, complicated. I think what you were doing back in the day probably was a little bit complicated, and it also wasn't really working. And so
that's exactly right. And there are certainly conditions where we want to get more complicated, and there is a lot to know. And I love knowing all the details. But at the end of the day, 90% truly of what I tell my clients is a lot of the same stuff. It's less processed food, more stress management, more time in nature, more water, more vegetables, more whole foods, some macronutrient balance, less sugar, more sleep. All of that kind of stuff benefits most people. I would venture to say all people, but I'm sure there's an exception here or there.
Right. There's always got to be one out there. But yeah, I would agree with all of that. And one of the things I've heard you talk about lately, which is not really something I've specifically covered on the show, which is surprising. I've been like you, have been going strong for, I think, 3.5 years now. And I don't think we've ever specifically covered cravings. I did have a gentleman on here. Oh my gosh. I think it's been about 2 years now. We talked a little bit about the science of behavior and habits and things like that. And we touched a teensy tiny bit. That was Dr. Judd Brewer. I don't know if anybody knows him out there, but kind of a neuroscientist. And we got a little bit geeky, nerdy on sort of the brain stuff with respect to habits and a little bit of cravings and stuff. But I've never really specifically, talked about that in length. So I'm actually excited you offered that as one of your potential topics. And I thought, let's do it, because we just haven't had much on that on my show. So I'm so excited to chat a little bit more about cravings. And maybe you could just first start by just describing a little bit like what a craving is, and then we'll jump into, brain chemistry and a bunch of other stuff. But maybe just start with, what is a craving?
Sure. I define a craving as a desire for a particular food or a particular type of food. So hunger, if you're truly hungry, it's like anything goes. I'll eat broccoli and chicken. I'll eat an apple. I'm hungry. I just want food. My body needs food. But a craving is, oh no, no, thank you to the chicken and broccoli. But yes, that ice cream, that looks really good. Or no, thank you to the apple, but those chocolate covered almonds or something like that. Or it could even be a healthier food. It could be, I have a craving for the proverbial pickle or shrimp or whatever. I've heard a lot of interesting cravings, but a craving is when we want a particular food. A craving, if you define it a little more broadly, could be I want a particular anything. But I think
Yeah.
today we'll talk about food cravings.
Yeah, let's definitely keep it. I think to food, we could certainly crave anything. So many different things out there to crave. But yeah, food, with respect to food, and this is, you just mentioned something that kind of that made me kind of laugh in my mind a little bit. As my audience knows, my wife and I have 6 kids, and so every time, and these are all singleton pregnancies. So 6 times pregnant, 6 natural births, and we have 6 kids. And so every time I watch my wife go through the whole pregnancy process, there were a lot of funky cravings. Like you mentioned, the pickle. For her, that there were certain like have tos, like I need a strawberry like right now, kind of thing. And those were always super fun and interesting. And I think the cravings part, I love that you kind of shared that there's both sort of a scientific, like maybe if you have a certain need, maybe you need a micronutrient or something, and you want to have something, or like you said, something salty, maybe you might be a little bit dehydrated, low on salt, you want something like a pickle or whatever. But there's also a very, I would say, large piece of cravings is more emotional, behavioral, in that sort of realm, sort of less tangible in a way. And I think we need to understand both. So maybe we can get into a little bit of the first kind of sciencey part, like tell us a little bit about dopamine, and then let's kind of move into some of these other more emotional types of cravings and things. So let's go with that.
Yeah, sure. So dopamine, the one that you mentioned, kind of bridges the gap between the physical and the emotional. There are some more physical that we can get into, like nutrient deficiencies or imbalanced blood sugar, things like that. But to start with dopamine, which you said, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is associated with reward. So if you envision like the old school video games, Mario Kart or something, where you hit the coin and that goes cha-ching, that is the epitome of a dopamine burst in our brain. It's a cha-ching. It feels good when we do something. It feels good when we cross an item off our to-do list. If you're me, I love doing that. Or for some people, I wish I was this person, having a spotless home, that's a cha-ching. Or eating chocolate or whatever. Those are all little cha-chings, and the cha-chings are dopamine rushes. And today we have been conditioned to need in quotes or crave so many of these cha-chings. There's a wonderful book called Dopamine Nation, which talks all about this. And many people are studying this lately, that because of the constant connection, because of the social media algorithms, because of the pings and dings and all of that kind of stuff, our brain is just so wired to get these cha-chings. And when we're not getting enough satisfaction from something in real life, like, going outside and appreciating how beautiful your backyard looks or something like that, we crave it from food oftentimes.
Yeah, no, I love how you shared that. And the cha-ching, it's whether it be, for me, it was Pac-Man, gobbling up all those little dots, or Donkey Kong. Those were my
Yes.
cha-ching when I was a kid. And those, yeah, it's interesting that whatever it is now, it's just swiping on your phone, right? I mean, talk about a dopamine,
Yep.
endless dopamine surge. And I think that leads into one of your other favorite things to talk about, which is the hormonal kind of cues and triggers behind cravings. And maybe I alluded to this slightly with pregnancy, because there's lots of hormonal surges in pregnancy. But let's just talk a little bit about the hormonal side of cravings as well.
Yes. From a physiological perspective, I think pregnancy is the perfect breeding ground for cravings, because hormones are shifting dramatically. There's no time in a female's life that hormones shift so dramatically as pregnancy. And of course, if you are a female who has a menstrual cycle, your hormones are shifting through the month all the time at a smaller scale than pregnancy, but still they're shifting, and we'll talk about that. But then also in pregnancy, you have these nutrient deficiencies because your body is so brilliant and it's prioritizing the baby. So if there's a limited quantity of a nutrient, it's giving the nutrient to the baby, and then the mom has less of the nutrient and experiences these cravings. But to go back to the hormones, anytime we have fluctuations of hormones, primarily here I'm talking about the sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, but this can apply to any kind of hormones. When we have drastic shifts in ghrelin and leptin, those regulate our hunger and satiety, even insulin, even cortisol, the stress hormone, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But any shift in hormones leaves our body kind of like, what's going on? It's a little bit off kilter and out of balance. And that leads us to crave comfort foods, whatever that is. So when a woman is about to start her period, the time of the month that everyone's partner dreads, they're often craving comfort foods because of those hormone shifts being so dramatic and leading their body to feel a little off or a little scared and looking for comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. And to speak directly, we're talking about PMS, those couple of days right before the period starts, where if you have a friend, family member, spouse that's gone through this and you've seen it, it's a real deal. I mean, when those levels are starting to plummet, there's some funky cravings going on and some funky stuff. And actually in the body, I mean, this is the time, and we've talked about this in other realms, like when I spoke of intermittent fasting a couple of times. This is not the time to like push it and go all out and go for your, OMAD one meal a day when you're PMSing. Like that's the exact wrong time for that. And of course, you know that you don't feel like doing it anyway, but these hormonal surges are real and they're tangible, they're palpable, and they do affect what we crave. And so it's a super fascinating, we'll get into that, I think, a little bit later, but you already alluded to the nutrient deficiencies a little bit with respect to maybe during pregnancy, when you're growing a child, you prioritize the fetus, right? Prioritize the baby to make sure they're getting the nutrients. And often, probably one of the most common things we see in pregnancy is anemia. And this is something that hopefully it gives the mom some desire to crave, something with high protein, whether it be in dark, greens, or in maybe a nice grilled steak of some kind or whatever. They have these little urges to eat what they need for their body, the deficiencies. Can you touch a little bit more on that?
Absolutely. When I have pregnant women as clients, I like to help them lovingly differentiate a true craving from ooh, I'm pregnant, I'm eating for two, and now I can eat donuts every day or something like that, because probably your body doesn't actually ask you for donuts every day. But I really, truly believe that when we listen to our body, I say to my clients, is that craving down here and I'm touching my abdomen? Or is it up here and I'm touching my head? If they're true craving, and their body is actually craving it, it's physical and not emotional, then oftentimes that's a nutrient deficiency. And my favorite one here is chocolate, because if I crave any food in the world, it's always chocolate. And I like to tell myself, well, when you crave chocolate, that could be a sign of a magnesium deficiency. I happen to love magnesium as a mineral. I think it's a fantastic option for supplementation for a lot of people. And of course, finding magnesium from your food and dark leafy greens and things like that. But when we have high stress, for example, when we exercise a lot, all of these things are burning through magnesium. And if you find yourself craving chocolate and maybe even some leafy greens, that's weird, I don't crave those very often, you might look into something like magnesium. There are lots of other examples. Like you mentioned before, the pickles could be an electrolyte imbalance, meaning that you might be dehydrated and you might actually need some water, but your body is trying to tell you what it needs nutritionally when it gives you these cravings.
Yeah, absolutely. The body's really smart. And I think one of the biggest problems present day is that we are, I say this a lot, overfed. Calorically, we are overfed. We eat up to 30% more calories than we did as a people in the US 50 years ago. It's crazy. We're eating 5, 6, 700 calories more per day present day than we used to. And part of the reason for this is that we are overly reliant on not just processed foods, but ultra processed foods. They make up, 60 some odd
Yes.
percent in kids. It's almost 70% of their diet. And these foods are calorically very high. We're getting tons of calories, but they are nutritionally very poor. And this speaks exactly to what you said. When we have deficiencies in our body knows, our body's smart. It's like, hey, I need more magnesium. Hey, I need more this. I need more that. I need to eat more food. And so we reach for what's available. So if we have those highly processed foods, whatever they may be in our cupboards, pantries, refrigerators, we reach for that. And guess what? They don't fill the void and we're still hungry. I mean, the food manufacturers love it, right? They
That
specifically hire people to do this. The food scientists, they produce these foods, which are super palatable. They affect the dopamine in our brain. They say, oh my gosh, that was amazing. They're creamy, they're salty, they're sweet, whatever, let's get more. And we don't fill the nutritional void. And so we want to keep eating. So it's a fact. We eat more calories today than we used to. And I think this is part of the issue. You said it very well.
absolutely agree. I always go back to that commercial. I don't know if you remember Pringles, once you pop, you can't stop. And they were right. They were absolutely right, because something with salt, sugar, fat, all of those combined, and then the artificially manufactured flavorings and things like that, that is increasing our dopamine. And there are literally no meaningful nutrients in a whole can of Pringles. I have no idea actually how many calories are in there, but I'm guessing it's
A
like
lot.
1,000 or something like that, but zero nutrients. So just
Yeah.
what you said, your brain is still saying, I need more nutrients, I need more nutrients. And so you're eating more and more and more, but it's a mismatch. It's not getting anything that it needs. And we are getting too many calories from eating the Pringles without enough nutrition. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree fully.
Once you pop, you can't stop. That's hilarious. And I actually used to buy Pringles fairly readily because they're just like that. And they're amazing. And happy to say, I can't even
Yes.
think of the last time. It's probably been a decade or more since I've even had Pringles. But let's go to the next topic with respect to cravings. And that is something I love to talk about because a lot of my colleagues, medical doctors like myself, like to poo-poo this topic because we collectively often underappreciate. And this is the whole notion of hypoglycemia, right? And when we say hypoglycemia, this just means a lower blood sugar than whatever your normal is. So everybody's normal
Yes.
is a little different. And in medicine, we are kind of like, well, if it's not at least below 60, it's not true hypoglycemia. We kind of, oh, that's not really real. That's in your head. Well, I have something to say. I was severely mistaken when I thought that a decade ago. It's actually very much a real thing. And you could be hypoglycemic with a blood sugar of 90 if you're used to 150 or 175, or it could be hypoglycemia. You feel it when you're 70 or 80, when the blood test will say, oh, that's perfectly normal. So let's talk about that just briefly, because there's a couple more topics I want to cover, but how does that factor in the cravings?
Sure. So when we eat, a kid on Halloween eats a bunch of candy, they get a blood sugar spike, and then the crash that comes after usually manifests in a temper tantrum, a nap on the floor, something like that. That's an overhyped manifestation of what's happening in our bodies every time our blood sugar drops. If we weren't adults and holding it all together, we want to take a nap on the floor. We want to have a temper tantrum. Our body does not like the feeling of coming down the backside of that blood sugar roller coaster. And just like you said, our blood sugar, quote, normal, our baseline is being elevated because of all the things you talk about, the processed food and the low nutrient quality and all of that, and too many refined carbohydrates. But when someone, let's say their baseline is something really high, like 130 or 140, then maybe they eat a meal, it takes them up 30 or 40 more. They're crashing down the other side. And like you said, they're only at 90, which isn't technically low, but they feel like they're flying down that roller coaster. Your body is smart again and is trying to save you from flying down that cliff, by getting some food that will pick you back up again. So if you have that craving at 3 p.m. or a couple hours after lunch and you tend to have a higher carbohydrate lunch, check the lunch and check how you are actually feeling and see if there are other healthier ways that you could stabilize your blood sugar, maybe reducing the carbohydrates, increasing the protein and fat at lunch, or maybe turning to something if you need that, like an apple or something like that, instead of the candy, which is going to keep you on the roller coaster.
Instead of that Snickers bar that really satisfies that I used to reach for. No joke, Megan.
Yes.
I used to carry one of these in my backpack, not because I was
Wow.
diabetic. I do have a daughter who's diabetic, and guess what? I don't put any candy in her backpack. There are a couple of fruit items that I'll put in there, like a banana or whatever. But I really had this thought that, like, I had to reach for something quick that had that sugar in there. And I was under the thought back then that, you know, this Snickers bar really satisfied. And I, for years, carried one in my backpack, always, throughout medical school, throughout residency. And I'm happy to say, I don't even think I've had a Snickers bar in a decade. It's just crazy. And but when we have this notion that we need something right away, and often it's because of exactly what you said, we tend to, as people, eat a little bit, in my humble opinion, too many highly processed carbs, whether they be sugars, grains, flours, and the like. We eat too many of them. And so we tend to run a little higher than we need to. And every time you eat a carbohydrate laden meal, your body is trying to protect you. It sends out the insulin, right, to get it out of the bloodstream so you don't have what's called, hyperglycemia or more feared complication like diabetic ketoacidosis, where you get the high blood sugar and you get the acid in your blood. Like, that can kill you. So it sends out the insulin. It knows what to do, but it kind of like overcorrects in a way to how you feel. You notice that, oh crap, I went from whatever it was, 150 down to 90. And your doctor says, well, 90 is normal. It's all in your head. Well, for you, that's a big deal. And you feel it and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to go read, it's the new word, right, in our dictionary. That's hangry, right? We get hangry. We're like, I got to get something right away. And we never even had that word in our vernacular 30, 40, 50 years ago, because I feel like we didn't have, the high carbohydrate laden processed diet that we do now. Let's move on. There's two other things on your list that I wanted to cover. We could probably even cover those together because I think they're related. And then we'll get into my favorite part, which is, what can we do? What are the steps that we can actually, put in our lives on a daily basis to overcome cravings and make all this super actionable and simple? So the last couple of topics that involve the cravings are emotional triggers, as well as some conditioning aspects. Maybe you can just speak to those real quick, and then we'll get into more of a sort of what to do, how we overcome this, or how we can effectively manage this in our lives, these cravings.
Absolutely. And you're right. These two are related. So emotional triggers is when I feel a certain way, stressed, anxious, lonely, bored, scared, guilty, tired, whatever, I am turning to food as a way to alleviate that. And conditioning is just more of an experience. So if I go to the movie theater, I remember every time I went with my grandma, she would buy me popcorn. So I want popcorn. Or a lot of people, when they walk in the door from work, they feel like the need to just go get the chips or something like that, because transitions can be hard for our brain. So it's when I feel this way or when I do this thing, I am used to having food to alleviate that emotion. And this is something that we overcome with all of those behavioral strategies that you were referencing before. But being aware of what's causing that is a huge first step.
Yeah, totally. And I'll just share that I used to, every single night, and it was multifactorial, as you just shared. I used to crave ice cream, like legit. Not only did I crave it, but I gave into it. I mean, I would have at least a pint of ice cream every single night when I got home from work. It was a stressful time. I was working 10 to 12 to 16, 18 hours a day, and I'd come home and I'd plop myself in front of the TV. I'd turn on the surf channel, watch some surfing, and I'd eat a pint or more of ice cream. And so there were both emotional triggers, stress that I was feeling, like this was my comfort go-to, that creamy, very sweet and just the right consistency. It checked all the boxes for me. It tasted really, really good. It had that sweetness. It had some emotional kind of stress relief component there as well. And I think this is a good time. I just want to mention briefly how, for me personally, although I'll be honest, I still love the taste of ice cream. Like legit, like if
Who
it's
doesn't?
my kid's birthday and there's like a really creamy, real, like I like Breyers because they have about 5 ingredients and I recognize all of them and it's real. Or we even have I'm embarrassed to admit, we have an ice cream maker. Like I own an ice cream maker. The health guy has an ice cream maker. And once in a while we'll make our own ice cream and it has like 3 ingredients. You know, we have to use heavy cream and all the things. But what happened, which was super interesting, and I wanted to get your take on this, is that one of the big sort of, I would say, factors involved with our cravings that we often don't talk about, because this is kind of a new kid on the block, is our gut health. And legit, our cravings often can come from those little things, those bacteria, microbes that live in our gut. They literally send signals, and this is well documented. There's tons of papers, dozens of them out there that show they literally send chemical messengers to our brain and say, hey, eat this food. Because why? It makes them survive. And what's the deal? It's survival, right? Survival of the fittest for them. They don't care about you. They want to survive. And so, you know, the firmicutes, for example, phyla, that's like, you know, the ones that we're trying to not have too much of, but they'll literally say, hey, eat that second, third bowl of ice cream, because they proliferate, they grow, and that's all they want. And so maybe we can talk just a brief moment about how both, you know, in my case, I was kind of stressed out with work. That was probably altering my gut flora, if you will, but there's I feel like a lot of basis to our cravings in our gut. Can you just speak to that briefly?
Absolutely. So exactly like you were saying, we develop and cultivate the gut bacteria that likes the food that we're eating. So a really silly example is if I put bird food out in my backyard, I'm going to have birds there because they like the food. Now, if I put processed what some people would call, quote, junk food. I don't really love that term, but if I put ultra processed food in my body, the bacteria who love to eat ultra processed food are going to come in my body and populate in greater proportions to what we would call the healthy gut bacteria. Now, if all of a sudden I stop feeding it that ultra processed food, those bacteria are having a heyday in there. They're like, Megan, what's going on? You stopped feeding us. The birds outside might be chirping at my window because I forgot to put food there. That's your body actually craving the foods that you're used to. So when you were eating ice cream every night, you cultivated those bacteria that did really well with ice cream and sugar and low quality dairy, unlike the dairy that you would make in your ice cream maker at home. And so they were truly asking for that. Now, another part of gut health and cravings is what I'm sure you've talked about before, which is that a lot of the quote happy hormones, neurotransmitters like serotonin, are actually manufactured in our gut. And so when we are feeling in a low emotional state, that vagus nerve between our gut and our brain is directly influencing how we feel and what foods we crave. And when we feel lower, we tend to crave those comforting foods. I always ask my clients, well, if you ate ice cream right now, would it work? And they think that what I'm trying to tell them or trying to get them to say is, no, it wouldn't work, Megan. But the truth is, yes, it does work for that 5 minutes. It actually does make you feel better. And that's why this stuff is so hard. Now, of course, they were right. In the long term, it doesn't work. It doesn't take away our problems. It doesn't truly do anything beneficial for our body. But in those 5 minutes, you do numb out the world. You do get that rush of dopamine that we've talked about. You might feel better. And that's part of why these cravings are so tough.
Yeah, totally. And what I kind of alluded to earlier is I still present day, I like the taste of ice cream. I like the creamy.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's more the creamy than the sweet. I'm not a big sweet guy. I don't know. I'm different in the way that I don't really crave chocolate. I actually do like chocolate, but I never really crave it. I'm just not a sweet. I wouldn't describe myself as having a sweet tooth, but I just love the creamy. Something about the creamy. I don't know what it is. And so now, even though I still like the taste, my gut is completely different than it used to be. The makeup of my gut. I'm pretty darn sure I never tested myself for it back in the day, but I had for sure dysbiosis, maybe SIBO, maybe, who knows what, but for sure they were out of proportion to what it would be optimal. I had more than not so awesome guys and gals, and I had way less of the super helpful, beneficial bacterial flora that now, present day, I have, because now I don't even get the cravings. I'm not getting those signals like, I must have ice cream right now or I'm going to, decompensate. No, I whatever, in fact, I bought some ice cream the other day and we haven't even opened it yet. It was like a week ago we bought it, and it literally, myself, my kids included, we just don't crave it. I mean, if it's like a family event, we'll bust it out for my kid's birthday or something. We just had our daughter turn 6. And so we had ice cream and we had cake. I'm just going to admit, yeah, we had it and it was great.
Yes.
But we didn't have seconds, So,
and you know what? Your body's resilient to little blips like that, like cake and ice cream on your daughter's birthday, no problem. But I guarantee if you had ice cream every night for the next month, you would start craving it again. Our gut bacteria really do shift in the period of a few months. So
yeah,
the reverse is possible too. Just like you described, Dr. Hemingway, when you were coming off the ice cream, I bet for that month or two, it was a little dicey. You did want that ice cream. You might not have felt amazing walking in the door from work, but now you can see, you can hear, listeners, how he describes it. It's not that hard. It's not a struggle every day to resist these foods when you change your gut to work in your favor. I don't want to struggle every day for the rest of my life. That's for sure. I want my body to operate well enough to where I'm craving the food, I'm eating the foods that I crave, and those just happen to be really nourishing foods for me.
Yeah, awesome. And I think this is a perfect segue to get into a couple of your sort of high level and quite, I would say, quite easy to implement strategies on how to combat cravings. And we can just start with my example. Like, how could I be able to overcome or change or optimize, this kind of craving I have for ice cream? And number one, I think the first one you love to share is just to be mindful. And this is, I'll let you speak to it, but this just brings to mind this interview I had, and I alluded to it earlier, with Dr. Judd Brewer, where he asked me, he's like, hey, what is it like when you take that first bite of ice cream? Like, do all of your senses get activated? Can you taste the creamy? Can you taste the sweet? Like, what does that do for you? And then he's like, what about the second bite? What about the third bite? And by the time, I'll be honest, 5 bites or less, it's just not doing it for me anymore. It's like, okay, I could stop. He's like, well, could you stop after 3 bites or 4 bites? And I'm like, I totally could, because it's like, if I pay attention, which you're going to get into right now, if we pay attention and we're mindful about what we're eating, it makes a big difference. So why is that? Tell us about that piece. I'm curious.
Absolutely. So we are so used to multitasking. We're trying to eat our ice cream while we're also watching TV and check our emails, and maybe we're wiping the kitchen counters at one time. Our attention is so fragmented that when we're eating these foods that actually do give dopamine and do give that pleasurable feeling, we're not even getting that pleasure. So that goes back into the overcaloried, undernourished thing, or maybe overcaloried, underpleasured, where if I just try to do 4 things at once and I eat a chocolate bar, I might have to eat that whole chocolate bar to get a certain amount of pleasure that otherwise, if I just sat there and broke off 1 square, which I do almost every single day, just sit there mindfully, don't do anything else, and really try to experience the flavor. And that is one of the highlights of my day. And I love it. I really look forward to it. There's nothing wrong with enjoying your food. But if I were doing that, again, doing a million other things, I wouldn't get that same experience. So give yourself the gift, if you are going to eat something like that, to sit there mindfully, experience it, think about it, don't do anything else, and really just savor it. That's the first thing you could do. And I think back to your example with the ice cream, I would have encouraged you to go back through the day and make sure that you were eating a balanced diet and that you were well hydrated. My guess is it was really hard when you were in the OR or the ER for 12 hours a day, tried to get adequate nutrition and water all throughout the day. But the average person listening is probably not in the ER every day, and they can be drinking water and nourishing their body really well with a balanced variety of produce, with good quality protein, some healthy fat thrown in there. That's going to eliminate a lot of the physical cravings if we just nourish ourselves and hydrate ourselves.
Yeah, totally. I think it starts in the morning, right? It starts, I always say, prioritize protein from meal one, whatever that meal is for
Yes.
you. If it's breakfast or if it's lunch, it doesn't matter. Prioritize your protein from the get-go. And the data suggests you eat protein first, you will actually not only crave less, but you'll be more satisfied, quicker, easier, and you'll basically desire less food throughout the day if you start with protein. And the other thing you said about being mindful, the data backs that as well. If you take away all the distractions, right? You don't have the TV on, you're not trying to check email, you're not, sitting there in front of the computer trying to just, pound that food because you don't have time. If you actually stop all the noise and you focus on whatever it is you're eating, doesn't even matter. We're not even talking about, hopefully it's high quality, nutrient dense food like Megan just shared. But if you just focus on what's in front of you, the data shows you will eat less calories, whatever that food is. Like, just pay attention. Get the distractions away, be mindful. And I would say 100% this is also true for me and in those I've worked with, just like you shared. So let's move on. You already talked about hydration. Wow, you're just crushing it over here.
Yes.
You're really good at this next thing that I feel like I'm not that good at, which is the prepare and plan piece. Talk a little bit about how that can help us.
Well, I think you are probably great at planning and preparing in your own way. And I would not prepare the same way if I had 6 kids. So I'm putting you totally off the hook for this one. For me personally, it does really help to actually have food prepared. And the reason is that I'm not going to say I don't have time because we all have 168 hours in the week. But what I've prioritized is seeing more clients into later in the evening, to the point where I want to have dinner pretty much ready for me to go. And so if I didn't prepare my food in advance, the option would be order something on DoorDash or like eat a bowl of cereal or whatever. But I don't prefer to eat that way. So I do prepare some meals in advance on Sundays to have them ready. I don't think everyone needs to do that though, but I do think we need to have a plan for busy days. So oftentimes for my clients who don't even want to cook anything, don't want to prepare anything, I'll still take them through the meal planning exercise. Okay, Tuesday night, you're going to drive to that local cafe that makes a delicious farmer's market salad that you love, and that's what's going to be your dinner. You're going to get that on the way home. Having that plan in advance for busy times takes away the need for willpower. Willpower is the enemy of cravings. When your willpower goes down, your cravings go up. And so we don't even want to put that cycle at risk. We just want to know in advance, these are the things I can do to support my health goals. This is where I'm going to get my food. It doesn't have to be perfect. I know life doesn't go according to the plan, but if you find yourself doing those, what I call like panic button moments and making your food decisions in that panic button, maybe some planning would help you.
Oh, totally. And it can be really simple stuff. You don't have to like pre-cook your whole, 7 days on a Sunday. I do a couple of small things. I try to chop up a bunch of vegetables at least once a week. And I just keep them in the refrigerator ready to go. And then in the morning when I usually have some sort of a egg scramble, and I can just reach for this stuff that's already diced up, because I'm going to be honest, just like Megan said, like, I don't want to take the time to like spend 15 minutes dicing up vegetables every single meal. But if I take one day a week where I'm dicing for 30 minutes to an hour, I have that ready for the whole rest of the week. And then I can throw them in with anything and everything. And it's just, if you can have that sort of easy button because you did a little bit of planning, even with the 6 kids, it helps a whole lot. And they actually like it too. So like in our house, it's like Taco Tuesday, almost every Tuesday. It's just, we just know we're going to have tacos tonight. It's awesome. We don't even have to think about it. I just make sure we have the ingredients there a couple days in advance type of thing. And we typically always have stuff for tacos. I don't know. I don't know, growing up in California, we've just eaten tacos a lot. And so Taco Tuesday, and we have lots of delicious and nutritious options to throw in there for our protein, and then other veggies and stuff we throw in there. And it makes it kind of easy. So a little bit of planning goes a long way. The last thing you share is about stress optimization with respect to our cravings. Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I find your example to be perfect. When you went through this 12-hour emotionally grueling shift, and then you come home, the only way you knew how to unwind at that point was to dive into the pint of ice cream. And when we don't have more positive stress management practices in our life, our body will fight to unwind in any way it can. That's the pint of ice cream, or maybe, unfortunately, that's alcohol or drugs or something serious, more serious than ice cream for sure. Our body needs a way to unwind. So we get to preemptively focus on what we can do to release that pressure valve so that we don't have to turn to the food, the alcohol, etc. And this looks a little bit different for everybody. For some, I love my morning routine personally. I would be a ball of stress without that. It's just my favorite time of day. But for some people, that might be snuggling with your dog or cat. That might be your running routine. That might be your walks with your partner. That might be a crossword puzzle or a bath or yoga. It doesn't have to look the same way for any person, but we cannot expect our body and brain to go through the crazy stressful day without that release of pressure. And that's where stress management comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love all the examples you gave because those are all really easy, right? How easy is it to snuggle with your favorite, whether it be puppy, your dog, your cat, or your kids, or just go for a walk, or just get out in nature, keep, a couple of deep breaths. I know you love talking about breathing, exercises and things, meditation, your morning routine. Oh my gosh, we don't even have time to get into your amazing morning routine. I actually want to hear about that. Maybe we'll have to have you back because I don't think I've done an episode on morning routine yet either. At least not recently.
It's fun.
But I couldn't agree more. You got to have these simple sort of in your back pocket ways to, what I like to say, optimize the stress, because it's coming. It is coming. We know that, right? The last couple of years, a heck of a lot of stress has come our way. And if you have these quick little options in your back pocket, going for a walk, taking a couple deep breaths, snuggling with your pet, snuggling with your partner, going, whatever it is, breathing, getting in nature, now they like to call it fancy things like forest bathing, like just get outside, go for a walk in your neighborhood. You don't have to find a forest. Come on. Anyway.
I know. I hear you.
This has been a lot of fun, Megan. I would love it if you would share just any parting thoughts and then how people can reach out to you, how they can connect with you, all that fun stuff.
Absolutely. So oftentimes when I work with clients on cravings, they feel like this is just the way it's going to have to be, and they're going to have to fight and white knuckle every single day. And I just tell you, if you're listening and you feel that way, you don't. Think about some of these things we talked about today, and think about a more loving approach to changing your behavior, to fueling your body well instead of restricting, to manage that stress instead of having to power through. Oftentimes, giving our body what it truly needs and being a little gentle with ourselves is the key to overcoming cravings. So hope that leaves you with some empowerment. And I would love to connect with any of your listeners. I'm at www.thelionsshare.org, LYONS share.org. I'm on Instagram at The Lions Share, and I am more than happy to answer any questions or do anything I can for anyone listening.
Awesome. And she's got a great podcast. She's got an amazing podcast. I hope you guys will check that out. The link for all of that will be there as well in the show notes. And I just appreciate you, Megan, for coming on. It's been a lot of fun. And I love that we had a chance to talk about something I hadn't really covered in detail. And so I thank you and I appreciate you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching, and remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you never miss out. Aloha.